Hi, today I want to talk about grief because somebody who's very important to me has recently lost somebody who's very important to them, and it's pretty much what's on my mind right now. But before I get too much further into this, I want to make clear that this is not about me. I'm not in need of sympathy at the moment. I was recently introduced to this idea via the Adult Nerdfighter group on Facebook. If you're not a member of the Adult Nerdfighter group on Facebook, I think you should check it out. It's kind of a really cool community of people. But anyway, the idea is this. If you are grieving, you're in the middle of a circle. And these circles are concentric. And the person in the center of the middle circle is the person most affected by the event that has caused that grief. A spouse or a child of somebody who died, a person with cancer, that person is in the middle circle. And their family is in an outer circle, and a more distant family and friends and community members, all in circles that surround each other. And this idea that comes from an article that was posted to that Nerdfighter group, which I will post a link to in the description. The idea is that if you're in the middle of that circle, it is okay to dump your emotion and your grief and your anger and complain and do whatever you want to the outside circles, because what you need at that point is what you need, and everybody in the outside circles needs to provide it to you. And people in the outer circles can do the same into bigger circles, but you should never do that into inside circles. If you dump inwardly to people who are more highly affected by that grief, you're only going to make yourself and them feel worse. What you offer to people in inside circles is comfort. And if what I'm about to say isn't comforting, I'm truly, truly sorry. I am going to share some of my experience with really devastating loss. And it is my opinion that everybody suffers really devastating loss at some point. It's part of being human. So I have suffered this kind of grief, this kind of loss, twice in my life. And the first was when I lost a baby at 9 months pregnant. That was really hard. He had been dead for 2 weeks before I found out. We lived in a small town, and my doctor did not want to deliver the baby in that small town. So I had to drive about an hour to a larger town in order to have the baby delivered. And I knew at that point that he was not alive. He was not going to survive. I was not going to have a son. And so my husband of the time and I drove to the big city and delivered this baby, and I cried the entire way. That 1 hour I cried, just sobbing, heartbroken tears. But then when I got to the hospital, it was time to do the work of having a baby. And I had to do that work knowing that there wasn't going to be a baby at the end of it. And at that time, my family started to show up. I love my family dearly, but at that moment, I really needed space, and they really needed to be with me. I guess what I'm saying here is that whatever person needs when they're grieving, they should be okay with telling everybody that's what they need, especially if you're in the middle of the circle, if you're the person who's most affected. I wish that I had been able at that point to say, you guys just need to back off a little bit, because I felt really guilty. What makes me personally feel the worst when I'm grieving is when people in the outside circles are more demonstratively upset than I can be, because I am grieving terribly, horribly inside. I'm not necessarily a sobbing mess on the outside. And sometimes for me personally, I just need space. That was a really terrible time in my life. And when I really needed people was afterward. When I need people is like in the following weeks. And I need somebody to take me to a movie, or to go shopping with me, or to distract me with life, to get me living again rather than being so inwardly focused. So the second time I suffered devastating loss was when my dad got lung cancer. He was diagnosed with lung cancer, and I found out when I was living a long ways away, and I couldn't come to see him right away. By the time I got to where I could see him, lung cancer goes so quick. It's just really, really fast. By the time I was able to see my father, he was no longer capable of having a conversation with me. And so I grieved in stages at that point, because the information kept coming in stages. First, your dad's really sick. But you have to understand, this is the man who raised me. This was my primary parent. He was my caregiver. He and I were really close. And I mean, even if I didn't talk to him every day, it never occurs to you that your parent is just not always going to be there. It was a very devastating loss for me. And so I grieved when I found out that he was sick, and I grieved again when I realized that he was going to die, that it was a terminal illness. And I grieved again when I realized that I was never going to be able to have another conversation with him. And you know, it just went in waves and waves and waves. And at that point, that's my dad. And the problem with the circle thing, the problem with that hypothesis of human interaction, is that at that point, I feel like I'm the center of the circle. And in some ways I am. I feel like I am the most affected by this grief. That is my dad, my father. But a lot of people around me are at the center of the circle too. I mean, his spouse, of course. My siblings, of course. And so that problem that I have with me not feeling like I'm being demonstrative enough in my grief and feeling guilty about that is magnified by the fact that all these other people that I care about are also grieving, and their way of grieving is to just be a mess. I mean, not that I wasn't a mess, but their way of grieving was a lot more evident than my way of grieving, whereas I get the feeling that probably some people thought I was, you know, kind of stone-hearted person. I'm not, but grief to me is a very private thing, and I'm much more likely to sob and cry when I'm alone than I am publicly, although I'm getting a lot more public with my emotion as I grow older. I don't really have a point. I was asked to share my story. I was asked if I had shared my story, and I hadn't, and it occurred to me that maybe my story would be helpful. I really do feel like everybody does this their own way, and however you do it is the right way. And whatever you need, if you need to be left alone, or if you need people around you all the time, if you need somebody to cook for you, if you need somebody to drive you places, whatever you need, that's what you need, and it's perfectly okay to need that. And I would hope that if you're going through this, if you have just suffered the worst loss that a person can suffer, the loss of somebody who was really important to you, who was really close to you, I mean, that's the worst that can happen. If you have suffered this, I would hope that you would be able to understand what it is you need the most and be able to communicate that with the people around you. And I hope that for you, no matter where you're at, and I hope that it gets better.